I can hear birds.
It's Migrating to Australia. And as you can see behind me, it's the podcast. I'm Grant Williams. Grant at Work the Cloud Mel. No, what is it? It's at Work the Cloud Oz. I was nearly giving out my email address there. Today, we will be discussing coming to Australia. Well, all of the what do we call it? All of the travel restrictions are in place. I'm just here to twiddle buttons and make things work. That other voice, that giggle you heard referring to the birds out my window, is Mr. David Bongiorno, one of Australia's leading migration agents. Are we going with immigration agent or migration agent, David?
Well, what from March 22, it's purely immigration lawyer. We cease being. I'm an immigration lawyer and a migration agent, but from the 22nd of March, I'm purely an immigration lawyer because we've been taken off the list. We've been taken off the main register, and we're lawyers in our own right. Always have been, always will be. But as lawyers, we can give immigration advice up until March 22, so long as we're agents. But from March 22, the fact that I'm an immigration lawyer is enough. So immigration lawyer and migration agent for another week.
Fantastic. And then we can just refer to you as Australia's friendliest and most approachable immigration lawyer.
That's it.
And we can even extend it out. Principal at David Bongiorno and Associates. There we are.
Exactly. Gosh, what am I into now? My 14th year of immigration law and loving it. It's the area of law I live for, and to another 14 years, of course. And with this program, what are we now? 3 years in?
Well, we're getting close to 3 years in. Regular listeners who may have sometimes be confused by our numbering system, I'm working through the process of making the website, the web page, and the podcast stream consistent because I did get lost somewhere along the way. So we now have the episodes through in the feed clearly marked 0, which was our introduction to David right in the very beginning, and then all the way through number 1 through to, well, by the time this one goes out, it'll be 56 or 57. So where the people who have been expressing frustration about not being able to make sense of it, I got to it. It did take a little while, but that is done. And the new website is just about out. And we record on the Saturday. We stream live. So I want to acknowledge the eyeballs in the room who are watching us live. Hello, Jesse on Facebook. Thanks for popping in. If you are a regular listener who downloads the podcast, we're going to cover all of this housekeeping stuff at the end of today's time. But you will notice that there has been a slight change in the way we do our format. And our Saturday recordings, of which you're listening to right now, is going to be about strictly immigration issues or talking to a guest about how they got to Australia. And we'll be focusing on the particular visas, the process they went through, and pretty much what they do in Australia. But we're opening up a live stream that has been happening on Thursday nights, which, while it's still going to talk about the migration journey for Australia, getting to Australia, we're going to focus a bit more on, let's say, society and culture, and it's going to be a little bit more fun. So if you're getting episodes in your stream and you're listening and you're not understanding what the hell is going on, there's going to be 2 different styles of episodes, and they will be uploaded on different days. So we'll stick to Mondays for our Saturday style immigration law. I'm not going to say it's dry because we deliberately try not to have a dry and boring academic style podcast. But our Thursday podcasts will be released on either Thursdays or Fridays and they will be more fun. So if you don't like one or the other, feel free to just ignore that one. I mean, but we are trying to cater for some different requests. And look, to be honest, David, we're nearly 3 years in. There's only so many visas, right?
There's only so many visas. It's a dynamic area of law, constantly changing. So what we will be doing is, obviously, when the odd new visa subclass comes into effect, we will break it down and deal with it comprehensively. But in the meantime, there's always news. Sometimes no news. And in those cases, we will look at profiling people who are of interest, who've made a migration journey and contributed greatly to Australia.
Yes, and no, I'll leave the further comments about that until the end of the show. We're also going to check out a couple of our latest reviews, which trust me, that's entertaining. But look,
today's about
hang on,
David.
Hang on, David. Let me do the introduction. I can't resist. This stupid middle-aged guy who contributes little of expert content to the show is now throwing to our migration expert, Mr. David Bongiorno, to lead us off on coming to Australia during the COVID travel restrictions.
What we're talking about is not legal advice. It is general information to enlighten. If you rely upon this information, you are a Grant.
You're a galah. You're a drongo, or in the Northern Hemisphere, they might call you a barnyard goose.
Coming to Australia is possible at this time. It's very difficult to come to Australia at this time. One of the non-legal issues is the flight, the cost of the flight. Another issue is the caps. But Grant, we're bringing people into Australia, not as many as we normally do, but people who are exempt from travel restrictions and can enter Australia are, of course, Australian citizens. Australian citizens can. Those who can't might not be able to afford the airfare, and airlines. What are some of the fees you've heard mentioned for one-way flights to Australia, Grant? Have you heard? They're incredible.
What I've heard regularly, David, is that people will book an economy fare and they might have booked it 6 months ago, and then right up to the day or the day before they're leaving, they get bumped off. Now, people who can afford a business class or first class ticket are anecdotally they're reporting that they can get a flight.
Correct.
But that makes it really hard if you're a family, 3 kids and two adults trying to get back here. I mean, that's a house deposit,
It's a lot of money. We won't go into the politics behind it, but what we will talk about today is that people who do have the money, who are Australian citizens, who can get a flight and not get bumped, are able to return. Permanent residents are able to return. And people who listen to the program will know that permanent residents are just as important as Australian citizens. And the only difference between people getting permanent residency and citizenship is if they're a permanent resident of Australia and they come from, hypothetically, Singapore law does not allow them to be a dual citizen. So those who are permanent residents and those who are citizens can come to Australia.
Yeah. Now, I just want to point out, David, to labour the point that the issue of getting a flight is nothing to do with the government. It's
good point, Grant.
To do with the airlines. The cap, the number of people who are allowed to arrive each week at each international airport is a matter primarily for the state government or the territory government, but it is done in consultation with the federal government. In what we have now is this thing called the National Cabinet, which is it's an ad hoc body that they've put together for the period of the pandemic. So the heads of government are all getting together and are deciding that Sydney will take, I think they're taking 3,000 a week. Melbourne are taking Melbourne are
every week.
taking about 1,400 a week. So, so once those slots are filled, no more people can come in.
If you've just joined the live stream or been getting a cup of tea for the first 10 minutes of the podcast, we're talking about the exempt categories first. We're going to get those who can come here out of the way, and Australian citizens, Australian permanent residents, they can come. They're exempt from travel restrictions. Immediate family members of Australian citizens or permanent residents are exempt from travel restrictions. They have to get a visa, of course. New Zealand citizens usually resident in Australia, they are also exempt. Persons transiting Australia for 72 hours or less, they're exempt as well. Air crews, we all know air crews, maritime crews, they're exempt. And people who hold a 188 visa, business investment visa, they're exempt. Okay.
And that, I'll just stop there, David, too, because there's been a lot of disquiet, a bit of aggro in the public consciousness about people, film stars, celebrities, those kind of things coming in. Now, they come on a visa like that if they are involved in a production.
Well, they're different, and we'll go through the categories of people who are excluded. Yeah. But generally, film crews and film stars bring to Australia much money. They create much local employment. Film crews inject enormous amounts of money into the local economy. And Queensland, I think, at the moment, I might be wrong, has 10 major productions going on. So that's a wonderful boost for Queensland.
And 126 in the last year. That was, you obviously saw the story that I did, David, today. So, yeah, for Queensland, those productions have been extremely valuable for their state economy. So
immeasurably, millions and millions of dollars in creation of local employment. Immeasurable, I mean, millions and millions of dollars and lots of local employment.
And it's worth pointing out that though a lot of the people working on those productions are people who would normally be working in festivals and TV production and other live experiences that have not been happening during the periods of lockdown and border closure in Australia. There's still no musicians on tour in Australia. The festivals did not happen.
So it's a good thing these people are getting employment that they wouldn't have otherwise.
Yep. So while I was a bit nasty to the lesser talented Jonas brother, the clarification, I did a bit of research, and you've obviously said something today, David, that he's unlikely to have kept an Australian citizen or permanent resident out.
No, not at all. Absolutely. And the story we dealt with, we had to get the exemptions out of the way. We had to get out of the way at the start of the podcast the exempt categories. They're the Australians and the New Zealanders. Now, people who are not Australian or New Zealand, not Australian citizen, not Australian permanent resident, not New Zealand citizens, usually resident, they can get exemptions if they're travelling at the invitation of the Australian government, if they're providing critical medical services. We helped a doctor recently come to Australia. Her visa was granted in a day, her exemption granted in 2 days. So we got a doctor from Southeast Asia who's registered here, her visa and exemption in 2 days. And that's important because she's going to an area where doctors are desperately needed in this country. So doctors, allied health professionals, people who are going to bring critical skills to fight COVID are being given permission to enter Australia. Medical services. Now, people with critical skills or working in critical sectors, they're always going to be exempt during this period. And foreign nationals with critical skills that we don't have here are gold. They're gold. You know who else get exemptions? I'll tell you who else get exemptions. People who are completing year 12, year 11, and they've got an endorsement from the Department of Education and support from the relevant government. They get exemptions because they don't want kids who are stuck because of year 11, year 12 missing out on their education. People who have their occupations on the priority migration skilled occupation list. And I'll click on that list and I'll read some of the occupations, the PMSOL, the PIMSOL.
And
Now,
it's not a shoe.
we're not allowed to crack middle-aged jokes. We'll get in trouble with what was that person's name?
We'll get to that at the end of the show, Dave.
The priority migration skilled occupation list is chief executives, mechanical engineers, general practitioners, resident medical officers, psychiatrists, medical practitioners, midwives, nurses of all types, software engineers, developer programmers, social workers. These are people who, if employers want them, they get them. So what we had was a medical clinic that needed a general practitioner, and we got them here very quickly because these people can help in the fight against COVID. And one that shouldn't be a surprise to people is social worker. And that's an excellent call because societal discord sowed by social isolation has meant that there's a lot of mental illness, mental stress, mental frustration that needs to be dealt with. Visas are granted to these people. People they are granted to. Now, also, what happens? COVID lockdown happened. Oh, it's happened a few times. But anybody locked out who's finishing their medical degree, their dental degree, or their nursing degree, they can come in. What they've got to show is that they have a placement that begins in a hospital, and the government will let them in. If you're first or second year medical nurse or dental, it's too bad. But if you're in your final 2 years of study, you're not going to be prejudiced in any shape or form. One of the ones for general population travel exemption is compelling, compassionate circumstances. Now, getting the visa is one issue. Displaying compelling, compassionate circumstances is another. Compelling, compassionate has its ordinary meaning. So the Australian government might grant a visa for you to come if somebody has died, if somebody is very sick, let you come for the funeral. And you apply through a portal, and applying through the portal, you've got to present evidence of hospitalisation of Australian relative, medical report of relative, specialist report of relative, show how you are related to that person. If your immediate family, your opportunity or your likelihood of being granted a visa is great. If it's your great uncle, you've got no chance. So if you're overseas and your mum or your dad is unfortunately ill and you want to come and see your mum and dad during this time, you can, but you've got to present your evidence carefully and very, very meticulously. People applying for exemptions and getting rejected, and what we've seen is basically that the full story is not told. If you want to come on a visitor visa to see a sick relative, you've got to show how sick the relative is, how intimately connected you are. Is it your mother, your father, your brother, your sister? And the government will generally give you permission. But then the issue becomes, can you get a ticket? Do you have the money for a business class? Do you have the money for a first class? So it is very tough. And that's why we thought we'd talk about it today.
And as I mentioned earlier, there's been a lot of attention given to the issue in the sort of the mainstream television shows where they're always looking for a headline, and they haven't clearly pointed out that these problems are not the government problem. In the wider the wider problem of making sure that the airlines are not rorting, that's a government policy issue, but it's not an immigration law border force issue. So it's important that we tease them out. David, we've got a question that's just come up via YouTube from Gentleman, and it's relevant to what you exactly mentioned. How long would it take to process that kind of exemption? Example being a funeral or a parent, a mother or father being extremely ill?
It would depend on the evidence you provided. The more evidence you provide, the faster it will be processed. When we've done them, well, what I was saying just a bit earlier, for the doctor to come, we got that approved, the exemption approved in 2 days, the visa in a day. what happens when people have a sick relative here. I'm sorry to hear if it's you directly, the person who's questioned. It's unfortunate, and I hope the relative is able to make a swift recovery. The story is this: you need to show who the relative is. You would need to show their status in this country. You would need to show your relationship to them. You would need to show the doctor report, the specialist report. You would need to show they're hospitalised. You would need comprehensive, detailed report from doctor and specialist as to prognosis, or more importantly, diagnosis, and then prognosis. Then, depending on how detailed they are, it's not going to be Grant wants to see David because Grant is David's brother and David is sick. That won't get anywhere. You've got to detail everything. And so the quicker you can get that material together, the quicker you can get an exemption. But you've also got to apply for a visa as well. So the more evidence you provide to show the nexus between you and the sick Australian and the accurate and up-to-date diagnosis, prognosis of the client, of the Australian, will dictate how quickly you get your exemption.
So, David, I think you mentioned
Sorry, Grant. Let me go. Let's take that a little bit further. You'd apply for your visa concurrently, and you'd use a lot of the same reasons. It doesn't mean you get a flight, though.
No. But the important thing to be really clear about is that getting your GP, your normal family doctor, to write something will not be enough. You will
nowhere
need
near enough.
You will need specialist reports. You will need evidence of
diagnosis and prognosis.
Yeah, the kind of pathology that has been undertaken, really detailed stuff. So nobody is able to bluff their way through this category.
No chance, zero chance.
Yeah.
You've got to have proof of identity to show you are who you are, the person is who they are. You've got to show how you're related, so birth certificates or death certificates or marriage certificates. You've got to show how you're related to the person you wish to visit in Australia. People who have important employment here can also claim exemptions, but once again, they've got to emphasise how important their employment is, that they're actually qualified to do it. Letters from doctors, letters from employers, showing how crucial it is that you be in Australia. So the doctor report...
Sorry, David, I want to interrupt you there because you mentioned employment. Is there a working list that the department is looking at that would determine the kind of occupation or the kind of role that would be determined essential?
The critical skills, people with critical skills for the recovery to combat COVID and help build the economy, get exemptions when they're sponsored on 482 working visas, like the doctor we did. She was deemed critical, important, and she got what we applied for her because she's required. The PMSOL that I read before, that tongue twister, the Priority Migration Skilled Occupation List, looks at all the areas an employer can apply for their employee to come to Australia. That list, I might just click on that list again. Go through it.
So, well, and while you're doing that, sorry for the housekeeping in the middle, everyone. Email that to me, David, so that immediately after we've done this, I can stick it in the links on the webpage so that people can have a look at the kind of occupations, the kind of roles that are currently being considered as essential.
Well, they are considered essential, 100%, absolutely. And basically businesses that need mechanical engineers, general practitioners, resident medical officers, psychiatrists, medical practitioners, midwives, registered nurses in aged care, critical care and emergency, medical, mental health, perioperative, developer programmers, software engineers, social workers, maintenance planners. These are people, if businesses have needs for these occupations to work in their businesses, they can be sponsored on 482 visas or 494 visas for the country, and they can then also be satisfied. If it's 186, they can also be sponsored for 186 permanent residency. So the businesses that have a critical need for people in these occupations aren't being precluded from bringing them in, because the Australian government recognises businesses that need these people with these occupations. help the fight against COVID, help rebuild the economy. Does that make sense, Grant?
Makes sense to me, David. Hopefully everyone else has got that. We will put the list up. I'm going to sheepdog David so that he sends me the link so that we get the absolute correct list, and you can have a look for yourself at your own leisure.
If someone's wanting to come and see a parent or a child because they missed them, that's not enough. Nowhere near enough. Compelling, compassionate, if you're not offering critical skill, if you're not a medical, dental, nursing student nearing the end of your course, if you're not in any of the categories of student visa, year 11, year 12, if you're not military personnel, people can't come. People can't come. But those who are in those listed occupations, those who are coming to Australia with a reason to a capacity to make it better, they will be granted visas. If you just miss your child or your mum, you can't get a visa at this stage. Not yet. Not for a while. You've got to apply in time. You should apply 2-3 weeks before. The exemption and travel visa requests should go in together. Do them concurrently. Don't wait for one or the other. Basically, it's harder to get in, but it is possible. We've brought doctors in. We've brought, who can come in. If your husband or wife is Australian and you're an American or Italian, Chinese, Vietnamese, Greek, Turkish, whatever, if you come from another country, you can come in if you're the member of an Australian family. You need to get a travel visa to come in. And the department's been pretty good on granting of visitor visas for immediate family members of Australian citizens, not grandma, not grandpa, but if mum's American and dad's Australian and the kids are Americans, they can all come in. You got to get that flight. You got to get that flight.
That's the thing that is making it difficult, is getting the flight. So
getting the flight, and that's not the government's issue.
Yeah,
we're not apologists for the government, far from it. But what I think there's a bit of confusion out there. If you can't get a flight, you can't get a flight. But that doesn't preclude you from getting a visa and being eligible, meeting a travel exemption. Compelling, compassionate really is the way to go for people who aren't offering skills or qualities mentioned in the other alternatives. But if you don't do a case full of evidence, you won't get the exemption.
And that's the golden rule that we talk about all the time, David, is that getting a visa is made less difficult. I don't want to say easy. Less difficult.
Never easy.
Yep, less difficult with the bulk of reliable, testable evidence, not
evidence that can be verified rapidly.
Stuff.
Evidence that can be rapidly verified. That's the key. A lot of people don't think about considering collating evidence, keeping evidence, and that's their downfall. It's their loss, because without evidence, the cactus.
Now, sorry, David, to interrupt you. We've had another question on YouTube. Thank you too. We love getting the input. It's a follow-up, really. So even if there's a reason like seeing your fiance or coming to a funeral, you can't come.
Well, you can come to a funeral. That's a compelling, compassionate circumstance. Coming to visit a fiance, well, the better way to do it, rather than getting them to come here, is go see them yourself. That's another way. Every case,
but this is someone wanting to come to Australia to see their fiance. What can happen is that the Australian can leave to see their fiance. That's how that can happen.
And that's a good way to go. I haven't seen my fiance in Timor, Belgium, for 2 years or a year and a half. How long's COVID now? A year and a half. You'll get an exemption to go see them, as long as you can show you're in your genuine and continuing relationship. Yeah. And then you come back and you've got to show you've got to show you're going for more than 3 months.
That's right. As we covered in the episode about leaving Australia, is the difficulty then is getting a visa in the other country, because you'll probably have to be away for more than 3 months to get the Australian exemption. But most of the other countries, depending on the visa that you are applying for, have a
visa.
Or it's not even 3 months. What is it? It's 28, 67. I don't know. It's 28 days by 3 is generally the period. And then you've got, and sorry, David, and then you've got the issue of you also need a flight, and the flight has nothing to do with the government.
It's multi-step process, and it's often easier, far easier. A couple of our clients have gone to visit their fiancés. A couple of clients have been lucky to have their fiancés trapped here. And the law, as we've discussed earlier, the law is changing. So those who are on prospective marriage visas who've been trapped here from COVID do not have to leave, and they can have their prospective marriage visas or their 309 partner visas granted onshore. So basically, people who've been stuck here can reap the benefit of a rule change. If you haven't seen your fiancé and they've been locked out, go and see them. It's easier for an Australian permanent resident or an Australian citizen to go and see their fiancé in their home country or a third country than to bring a fiancé here. It won't happen. It won't succeed.
And of course, in the last handful of...
It'll only succeed when the visa's granted. Visas are being granted, but if you want to see a person and you haven't seen them for 6, 12 months, you've still got a long way to go before the visa will be granted. We've had, in this COVID period, prospective marriage visas granted, no issue. But bringing the people into the country because the wait between lodgement and grant has been so long is not possible. Not possible.
And I was just going to point out, and I will, that in the last handful of episodes that have gone up, both the updates and the hints and tips for the spouse visa is up there. And, of course, we had our episode on how to leave Australia. So if you can make it through all the middle-aged rubbish, you'll find some good tips in there.
We're having a laugh because we got feedback, and Grant will go into the actual review. It's only our second 1-star review, and we do wish that the person had used their real name, because hiding behind a nom de plume sort of defeats the purpose of a review, I think. So, we need to know who sent it.
I don't mind that. I don't mind that so much. And look.
But look, can I just give...
Let's finish with the visas. Go through that, and then we'll go through our housekeeping.
The story is this. Look, there are plenty of people who have come to Australia on visitor visas while they've been waiting the incredibly long times they have to wait for prospective marriage visas and offshore partner visas 309 section, the 309 component. Those of you who've listened before will know the 300 visa is a prospective marriage visa to get you to Australia. The visa's granted. You have 9 months to come to Australia, marry your partner, lodge an 82801 visa. The 309-100 visa is a double visa that gets the offshore spouse to Australia, and the 101 is granted. The 309-100 and the 100 is granted when they're onshore. A lot of people, as we speak, are trapped here because of COVID, and they've come to visit their partners on prospective marriage visas. They've come to see their partners on offshore spouse visas. So what's happening is these visas will be able to be granted onshore. Not necessarily going to be a rule or a provision that lasts for so long. I don't know how long it will last. We don't know how precisely long it will last. But what happens is if you're offshore now and you're lodging a prospective marriage visa or a partner visa, it's going to be far more probable, far more beneficial for your Australian partner to go and see you, because your chances of getting a visa to come here are extremely remote. To visit. If you lodge a prospective marriage visa, it'll be processed, and then you can come when it's granted. We've had a couple of prospective marriage visas that are at finalisation stage that have been lodged, and they've taken only a little bit of time, so they are processing offshore visas. They are processing them.
David, in light of the fun we've just been having, it just got a message saying, thank you very much for that answer. It was very interesting, and I will listen again.
Oh, that's good. But seriously, I suppose the only danger with the funeral, and if we look at the Islamic tradition, funerals are held very quickly after the death of a person. There might not be enough time to come.
And even if you get your visa, it may well be impossible to get a flight that can get you here in a matter of a couple of days.
Correct.
So one of the benefits of being an island continent a long way from everywhere else is that we have very little COVID. But one of the downsides is that sometimes it's very hard to get here at a time that suits.
When you apply, if you are unsuccessful, you look at the application and say, I haven't got an exemption because I haven't demonstrated the compelling, compassionate circumstances. Look at everything again, add as much evidence as you can and apply again.
That's all you can do.
It's all you can do. It's all you can do. All you can do. Death and severe illness are helpful ways for you to show compelling, compassionate circumstances. But who wants compelling, compassionate circumstances if your loved one is ill or about to pass? It's very hard. You're using evidence that.
David, you've disappeared. Whatever you did, knocked your sound out.
No, what happened?
Oh, there we are. You're back. You're back.
You don't want to use,
what were you saying?
If a loved one is passing in Australia, you've got to use evidence that's exceptionally confronting and triggering to get compelling, compassionate circumstances over the line. If you don't use that evidence, which can be incredibly triggering and stressful, you won't get a visa. You won't get exemption.
And it's sad. It's hard. But it's sad. How it is.
It's how it is. It's very sad. It's very hard. It's very confronting. And some of the people we've helped come to Australia have stories that are of loved ones here. It's very sad. It's incredibly sad.
And I guess a comment, Dave, is that look, there's been a couple of state elections held during the period of COVID, and the state governments that have exercised like a zero tolerance approach to introducing COVID into the community, they're extremely popular. So the likelihood that any of our local politicians are going to make it easier for people offshore to re-enter Australia while most of the rest of the world is not vaccinated, and while most of Australia is not vaccinated, it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to change.
When rollout happens, things will ease up progressively. But at the moment, it's the doctors, the engineers, the businesses needing doctors, engineers, high-end IT people, high-end engineering people, medical people, social workers who can contribute to the fight and restore the economy. They're going to always be able to come. Always. Compelling, compassionate, sick relatives, etc. A lot harder. And it's all assessed on a case-by-case basis. Grant, if someone has already seen or heard of a successful display of compelling, compassionate circumstances, and then they unfortunately find themselves in that circumstance where they need to do it themselves, that doesn't mean because their friend got it, they will. Each case for compelling, compassionate, each case for immigration is assessed on its own merits.
And I guess, stating the obvious, it's possible to do the applications yourself, absolutely. But if you think you have a difficult case, certainly contact somebody like David, if not David, that's what we're here for. People like me.
Yeah. To maximise chances of success, maximise.
And that's the whole reason we decided to do the podcast, isn't it, Dave?
It is.
I guess, David, we try to be positive about everything. I just want to point out to listeners who are around the world that even though things here are good and we are all pretty lucky and the vaccine has started arriving and there's local production of one of the vaccines going to start soon, but the government is already putting out the stories and paving the expectation that we thought we were all going to be vaccinated by October this year. They're now pushing that back into early next year. And at the rate they're going, we are falling behind by about 100% of where they expected to be every week. The scale of vaccinating a whole country in a country like Australia is a massively difficult challenge. Now, we're going to be way behind. So all of our expectations about travel to America or go to Europe on the trip of a lifetime, they're just having to be pushed back. You know, I know my expectations of when I can go to the airport is just going further and further back. But the other side of that, the reciprocal travel, is until all those other destinations are all immunised, the travel restrictions, the entry restrictions here will be severe. So apart from relying on what happens in Australia, we're also relying on what happens in the rest of the world, because an Australian traveller who goes to a COVID hotspot might find difficulty coming back unless they do that period of quarantine, which once the quarantine that we have now, the system we have now, has ended, $3,000 for 2 weeks in a hotel that the government accepts is probably going to be cheap. You'll probably be looking at something like $500 a night. You'll be looking at a $5,000 to $10,000 period of quarantine, which the average traveller probably won't be able to afford.
It's incredibly expensive. There are psychological issues people have suffered in lockdown, in quarantine. It's not for everyone. Could you spend 2 weeks in one room?
Oh, I could easily, but a
lot of people can't.
But I would be doing what I normally do, David, which is producing podcasts, using the internet, interviewing people, writing blog posts. You know, I'd be doing what I normally do. I'd just have a different view out the window. So I'd probably find it okay. But can I afford $3,000 for 2 weeks? No,
it's a lot of money.
And both ways. If you've done it on the way out and you've done it on your way in, I mean, $3,000 is the cost of my holidays usually.
That's it. That's it. And the other thing is a lot of Australians haven't paid it back yet. They owe the New South Wales government $3,000.
And well, because they don't owe the federal government, that might not be an impediment for them coming back in, unless those debts.
You got to pay it. I mean, otherwise it's going to follow you around.
Yeah, but I don't think a debt to the New South Wales government or the Victorian government is one of those things that
it's not a debt to the Commonwealth.
stops you at the border. So, but that's something that might be federalised. They might federalise those debts because quarantine is a responsibility of the federal government under the Australian Constitution. You may just find that situation is different by the end of the year.
I think Victoria is not charging people. I might be wrong on that. I seem to think that New South Wales is charging and Victoria is not. Have you heard anything otherwise?
I think the situation with Victoria is that certain categories of people are not being charged. Look, I hope we move to a situation where we can do home quarantine. But I understand the risk with that. But I wonder whether an authorization for essentially home detention with a GPS bracelet. I just wonder whether that, for all the civil liberties issues that it raises, would be a reasonable compromise, provided the legislation was, strictly limited, that it was only until September and it could only be for a period, a maximum of, let's say, 17 or 19 days, something like that. I understand why people aren't supporting that idea, But I don't know how we're going to get international students back until we have made it far easier for the quarantine period to occur and for the community to have confidence in it. And that's a big, big problem.
It's a good thing we're getting the 188, the investor, the business investment people in, because they create employment. They inject money into the economy. We need international students back, not just because they invest money in the economy, but they're great workers. They bring intellectual capital. They bring hunger and desire to be Australians, and they become great Australians and contribute to this country in their own unique ways. I took a Didi because, I don't have a car. I took a Didi into the office this morning, and the Didi driver was a permanent resident. He'd come by accounting, and he works as an accountant and drives a Didi on the weekend to earn extra money. See, 7 days a week of work, that's the hunger we love. That's the hunger that makes Australia great.
So, David, I can't resist the opportunity to give it a plug. He obviously beat the situation where studying to be an accountant will not get you PR.
He beat it, and he agreed. As I said, what an impossible, impractical, dishonest course it is now for people who believe there's a nexus between it and migration. No one doing accounting gets migration anymore. No one.
If I had been more prepared, David, I would have had the list of all of our episodes there for me to quickly refer to the episode number, but I didn't. So maybe I'll do that more. But we did have an episode titled "Don't Study Accounting or Smoke Weed."
That's it, because they will create great problems, and also don't study childcare. But that was it. It was short and sweet today, Grant. I just wanted to sort of touch on those who are exempt and those who have to apply for individual exemptions. If you just want to see your child or your parent because you haven't seen them for a long time, you're not going to get an exemption. No chance. But if there is a health or a serious health crisis, you can come and see mum or dad, but you've got to show how serious that health is. Not just they've got asthma. It's not just because they've got the flu
or they're having a hard time coping on their own. That won't cut it.
That won't cut it. Won't even come close. Yeah, you've got to demonstrate with evidence. We go along. One of the constant themes in this podcast is evidence. If you're applying for a visa and you've got to express your reasons why you're applying for that visa, you need evidence, good, solid evidence. A lot of people who do their own applications don't understand the importance of evidence in every aspect.
So can't do more than that, I think, on this topic. Now, David,
review
just
time,
a short message for It's Banny and Smelly Juice X from Australia. We're going to be talking about housekeeping, about the podcast itself, without any real migration information. So if you'd like, get lost. For the rest of you, I'll just talk about why we're doing the changes that we will be doing, and so that you can understand it when these other style of episodes arrive.
Can I just quickly say, Grant, when people review, we value negative and positive feedback. We learn from every piece of feedback we get, but make it real, make it credible, and let us know who you are.
Yeah,
don't hide behind silly names.
And actually, I'm not upset about this review. That's why I sent it to you the minute I saw it, David.
I laughed
because for those of you who listen regularly, and you've got to know David and I, after this episode finishes up, we are having a planning session, because I've been at David for months now, and David is busy. The work never stops, and because of COVID, things have become more difficult for getting visas, getting exemptions and all that. So David's been busy. So I'm not criticising David. Let's get that really clear. But I've been at David for ages about us being a little bit more organised in what we do each week, because we started this podcast with it being easy and being fun, and we really wanted it to be entertaining as well as informative. And we reckon we tick the box off on that. But there comes a time where you need to step the game up, and we are doing that, and we're moving into new platforms. And doing, and you're going to see a lot of different changes. But we're also going to plan much further ahead who we have on and how we have them on. It's been very ad hoc up until now. Usually I'll arrive and I don't know what the hell is going to happen. and I've recognized for a long time that at times we have produced episodes that have not been as good as some of the ones we did very early on. And we did do a lot more planning for each episode early on. But a couple of things happened. I got sick, I nearly died, and we had a pandemic. And I think it's a fair criticism that we have been indulgent at times. And certainly during the lockdown, we were just happy to have that hour and a half of FaceTime with each other, because we couldn't have the chat that we used to have before and after our recordings when we were doing them in David's office. So that's to let you all in behind the curtain a little bit, because I used to travel down to David's office. We would sit there either just together or with our guests who had decided to give us their afternoon, and I think we made engaging and informative podcasts.
100%. 100%.
But doing things by Zoom, even though we use a different platform, means people get very casual about all sorts of things. And David, since we started doing this, you've had now, I think it's your third lawyer that you've needed to employ. You've grown the team. You've then
yes, indeed.
Yep. You've had, as all businesses do, your support staff has changed. And every time that happens, the way you do things in your office has to change a little bit.
It does.
So we're flexible with how things happen. So I'm going to give, what was his name? I have to, my phone keeps turning off. I'm going to read it out. So I have to give him his due. And look, remember, it has a common thread with It's Banny Banny. It's Banny Banny said we always talked over each other, which we did. And I think since then we have made a concerted effort to improve the technique, just the practice that we have using the mic. And yeah, I think we've got better. I think you'll see that continue to improve. But Smellery Juice X from Australia, and look, seriously, it's hard to take seriously someone.
I don't even know what his name means. What the name means.
Neither do I. But look, good on him. He's given us a 1-star review on Apple Podcasts. And look, we're not going to hide bad reviews, because hey,
never,
you got to learn from them. And the heading of the review is "Can't make it through all the nonsense." Now, unfortunately, I don't know whether this was the Thursday night review that we did, where the Thursday night one that we did first, where we talked about I don't even remember what the serious stuff was, but then we went into the Australian idiom, the language, slang, all that kind of stuff. I suspect that's the one he listened to. And I would say, if that was the first episode you ever heard, you probably would say, who are these idiots? But here we go. Can't make it through all the nonsense. Mostly just middle-aged guys having a chat. Got a little info on the last episode. Go to YouTube if looking for actual information. There's quite a few good groups on Facebook. Well, I take the point, depending on which one he listened to. He certainly wasn't listening to any of our popular episodes. He didn't listen to the spouse visa. He didn't listen to student visa. He didn't listen to any of the general skilled migration episodes. But I take the point, and I will just say and I thank him for doing it too, because a lot of people will just go, this is crap, I'm not going to do it. But we deliberately, again, David, I'll ask you to cast your mind back to when you barely knew what a podcast was, and we sat down and we had a coffee at the cafe near your office, and I said that I think that you would be really good at doing an entertaining and informative podcast, but I don't want to do a podcast that sounds like three guys sitting around in the lounge room having a beer and talking about footy. So it's a fine line where you're trying to be entertaining and cover the information, and sometimes the information. Well, there's a couple of episodes we just didn't put out, which is why there was a long gap, because as we worked through the information that was supporting those visas, it was contradictory. So we couldn't make sense of it in a conversation without stopping and going back and looking for cases. And
I mean, that's absolutely correct, Grant. And so, what maybe 3 or 4 didn't get to air. And with COVID, that didn't help, because a lot of state and territory migration plans were put off until they got the nod from the federal government. So we do vet our episodes, and we probably have put about 3 or 4 that just won't see air because of those issues.
There's 3 that definitely won't see air, and I'm sitting on about another half dozen, some with guests, some with where either I wouldn't say any of our guests were not really good and have good stories. I'm not saying that, but the time involved in editing it to make it sound good has been extensive. Now, so I'm only persevering with them because the stories have elements which are really instructive or compelling. So we go with that. The other thing we're trying to do too is broaden where our guests are from and the types of stories that they have to tell. So you'll see that change. And I'm always mindful when I'm putting episodes up that sometimes we'll do a run of episodes where all of the guests have been men. So I cast around looking for the women. And look, to be honest, we are now going to concentrate, like we said on the Thursday night, we're going to concentrate a bit more on Australian culture so that we're relevant to people who have had the journey and are already here and are staying here, so that we're a bit more inclusive, that we're not only speaking to people who are looking to make the trip. And look, for those of you who are hardcore immigration law junkies, and I'm sure there's 1 or 2 of you, I've got a big list of visas, and David and I will be talking about them shortly. And we're just going to go back and start again, refreshing the ones that need refreshing
100%.
and covering the ones that we have not yet covered. To support us in that endeavour, we would like you to tell us if there are things you would like to have us talk about. And indeed, a little bit further down the track, I haven't talked to David about this date yet, but I'm thinking that the Thursday before Easter might be a fantastic night for us to just do questions. And if you got in touch with us beforehand, I would give you the link and you can join our chat and speak to us directly rather than just through the chat box. I can't see what David is trying to on that screen. Hang on, put it up again, David, and I'll do it this way. Ah, there we go. There we go. That you could have said that. I wouldn't have. I wouldn't have minded that. David has just informed me that his phone battery is about to die, so that means we'll be wrapping up. Look for the changed Migrating to Australia podcast.com webpage. There's going to be a quiz up there or a question up there for you to please give us an idea about, and I won't go any further. I'll tease you to go there.
Please keep the feedback coming too, good and bad.
Yes.
We do welcome it.
Now, David, if people need to reach out to you for any reason, where do they do that?
The fastest way, Grant, is Twitter, and my handle is at David Bongiorno, all one word, DavidBongiorno.
And the comment section will be open on the webpage. So that's a really good way to do it. Bear in mind, it's our webpage. The comments are moderated. So if we value constructive criticism, even if you don't like us, I'm happy for you to tell us why. But just giving us some pile of abuse or something, it won't see the light of day. So don't bother. I'm Grant Williams. That is Australia's favourite, friendliest, most approachable immigration lawyer, David Bongiorno.
Grant, have a good weekend, mate.
Thanks, everybody. See you again soon.
Ciao.